Good evening, and I'm glad that you're joining me once again for our reading from John Bunyan's classic Christian book, The Pilgrim's Progress. We left off last Sunday night with Christian and Hopeful still making their way together to the celestial city, and I will reread the last paragraph that we read last Sunday night before we pick up with what we haven't read so far. We'll carry on from there. It says, Then Christian and Hopeful outwent them again, and went till they came to a delicate plain called Ease, where they went with much content. But that plain was but narrow, so they were quickly got over it. Now at the further side of that plain was a little hill called Lucre, and in that hill a silver mine, which some of them that had formerly gone that way, because of the rarity of it, had turned aside to see. But going too near the brink of the pit, the ground being deceitful under them, broke, and they were slain. Some also had been maimed there, and could not, to their dying day, be their own men again. Then I saw in my dream that a little off the road, over against the silver mine, stood Demas, gentlemanlike, to call to passengers to come and see, who said to Christian and his fellow, Ho, turn aside hither, and I will show you a thing. Christian said, What thing so deserving as to turn us out of the way to see it? Demas said, Here is a silver mine, and some digging in it for treasure. If you will come, with a little pains you may richly provide for yourselves. Then said Hopeful, Let us go see. Not I, said Christian. I have heard of this place before now, and how many here have been slain. And besides that, treasure is a snare to those that seek it, for it hindereth them in their pilgrimage. Then Christian called to Demas, saying, Is not the place dangerous? Hath it not hindered many in their pilgrimage? Not very dangerous, said Demas, except to those that are careless. But withal he blushed as he spake. Then said Christian to Hopeful, Let us not stir a step, but still keep on our way. Hopeful said, I will warrant you, when by-ends comes up, if he hath the same invitation as we, he will turn in thither to see. No doubt thereof, said Christian, for his principles lead him that way, and 100 to 1, but he dies there. Then Demas called again, saying, But will you not come over and see? Then Christian roundly answered, saying, Demas, thou art an enemy to the right ways of the Lord of this way, and hast been already condemned for thine own turning aside by one of his majesty's judges. And why seekest thou to bring us into the like condemnation? Besides, if we at all turn aside, our Lord and King will certainly hear thereof, and will there put us to shame, where we would stand with boldness before him. Demas cried again, that he also was one of their fraternity, and that if they would tarry a little, he also himself would walk with them. Then said Christian, What is thy name? Is it not the same by the which I have called thee? Yes, my name is Demas. I am the son of Abraham. I know you, said Christian. Gehazi was your great-grandfather, and Judas your father, and you have trod in their steps. It is but a devilish prank that thou usest. Thy father was hanged for a traitor, and thou deservest no better reward. Assure thyself that when we come to the king, we will do him word of this thy behavior. Thus they went their way. By this time, by-ends and his companions were come again within sight, and they, at the first beck, went over to Demas. Now whether they fell into the pit by looking over the brink thereof, or whether they went down to dig, or whether they were smothered in the bottom by the damps that commonly arise, of these things I am not certain. But this I observe, that they never were seen again in the way. Then sang Christian, By-ends and silver Demas both agree. One calls, the other runs, that he may be a share in his lucre, so these do. Take up in this world and no further go. Now I saw that, just as on the other side of this plain, the pilgrims came to a place where stood an old monument hard by the highway side, at the sight of which they were both concerned because of the strangeness of the form thereof. For it seemed to them as if it had been a woman transformed into the shape of a pillar. Here therefore they stood looking, and looking upon it, but could not for a time tell what they should make thereof. At last Hopeful espied, written above the head thereof, a writing in an unusual hand. But he, being no scholar, called to Christian, for he was learned, to see if he could pick out the meaning. So he came, and after a little laying of letters together, he found the same to be this: Remember Lot's wife. So he read it to his fellow, after which they both concluded that was the pillar of salt into which Lot's wife was turned, for her looking back with a covetous heart when she was going from Sodom for safety, which sudden and amazing sight gave them occasion of this discourse. Ah, my brother, said Christian, this is a seasonable sight. It came opportunely to us after the invitation which Demas gave us to come over to view the hill Lucre. And had we gone over, as he desired us, and as thou wast inclining to do, my brother, we had, for aught I know, been made ourselves like this woman, a spectacle for those that shall come after to behold. Hopeful said, I'm sorry that I was so foolish, and am made to wonder that I am now not now as Lot's wife. For wherein was the difference betwixt her sin and mine? She only looked back, and I had a desire to go see. Let grace be adored, and let me be ashamed that ever such a thing should be in mine heart. Christian said, let us take notice of what we see here, for our help for time to come. This woman escaped one judgment, for she fell not by the destruction of Sodom. Yet she was destroyed by another. As we see, she is turned into a pillar of salt. True, said Hopeful. And she may be to us both caution and example. Caution that we should shun her sin, or a sign of what judgment will overtake such as shall not be prevented by this caution. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, with the 250 men that perished in their sin, did also become a sign or example to others to beware. But above all, I muse at one thing, to wit, how Demas and his fellows can stand so confidently yonder to look for that treasure which this woman, but for looking behind her after, for we read not that she stepped 1 foot out of the way, was turned into a pillar of salt. Especially since the judgment which overtook her did make her an example within sight of where they are. For they cannot choose but see her, did they but lift up their eyes. Christian said, it is a thing to be wondered at, and it argueth that their hearts are grown desperate in the case. And I cannot tell who to compare them to so fitly, as to them that pick pockets in the presence of the judge, or that will cut purses under the gallows. It is said of the men of Sodom that they were sinners exceedingly, because they were sinners before the Lord, that is, in his eyesight, and notwithstanding the kindness that he had showed them. For the land of Sodom was now like a garden of Eden heretofore. This, therefore, provoked him the more to jealousy, and made their plague as hot as the fire of the Lord out of heaven could make it. And it is most rationally to be concluded that such, even such as these are, that shall sin in the sight, yea, and that too in despite of such examples are set continually before them, to caution them to the contrary, must be partakers of severest judgments. Hopeful said, doubtless, thou hast said the truth, but what a mercy it is that neither thou, but especially I, am not made myself this example. This ministereth occasion to us to thank God, to fear before him, and always to remember Lot's wife. I saw then that they went on their way to a pleasant river, which David the king called the river of God, but John the river of the water of life. Now their way lay just upon the bank of the river. Here therefore Christian and his companion walked with great delight. They drank also of the water of the river, which was pleasant and enlivening to their weary spirits. Besides, on the banks of this river on either side were green trees that bore all manner of fruit, and the leaves of the trees were good for medicine. With the fruit of these trees they were also much delighted, and the leaves they eat to prevent surefits and other diseases that are incident to those that heat their blood by travels. On either side of the river was also a meadow, curiously beautified with lilies, and it was green all the year long. In this meadow they lay down and slept, for here they might lie down safely. When they awoke, they gathered again of the fruit of the trees, and drank again of the water of the river, and then lay down again to sleep. Thus they did several days and nights. Then they sang, Behold ye how these crystal streams do glide, to comfort pilgrims by the highway side. The meadows green beside their fragrant smell yield dainties for them, and he that can tell what pleasant fruit, yea, leaves these trees do yield, will soon sell all, that he may buy this field. So when they were disposed to go on, for they were not as yet at their journey's end, they ate and drank and departed. Now I beheld in my dream that they had not journeyed far, but the river and the way for a time parted, at which they were not a little sorry, yet they durst not go out of the way. Now the way from the river was rough, and their feet tender by reason of their travels. So the souls of the pilgrims were much discouraged because of the way. Wherefore, still as they went on, they wished for better way. Now a little before them, there was on the left hand of the road a meadow, and a stile to go over into it, and that meadow is called Bypath Meadow. Then said Christian to his fellow, If this meadow lieth along by our wayside, let us go over into it. Then he went to the stile to see, and behold, a path lay along by the way on the other side of the fence. It is according to my wish, said Christian. Here is the easiest going. Come, good Hopeful, and let us go over. Hopeful said, But how if this path should lead us out of the way? Christian said, That is not like, said the other. Look, doth it not go along by the wayside? So Hopeful, being persuaded by his fellow, went after him over the stile. When they were gone over and were got into the path, they found it very easy for their feet. And withal, they looking before them espied a man walking as they did, and his name was Vain Confidence. So they called after him, and asked whither that way led. He said, To the celestial gate. Look, said Christian, did I not tell you so? By this you may see that we are right. So they followed, and he went before them. But behold, the night came on, and it grew very dark. So they that were behind lost the sight of him that went before. He, therefore, that went before, Vain Confidence by name, not seeing the way before him, fell into a deep pit, which was on purpose there made by the prince of those grounds to catch vainglorious fools withal, and was dashed in pieces with his fall. Now Christian and his fellow heard him fall, so they called to know the matter, but there was none to answer, only they heard a groaning. Then said Hopeful, Where are we now? Then was his fellow silent, as mistrusting that he had led him out of the way. And now it began to rain, and thunder, and lighten in a very dreadful manner, and the water rose amain. Then Hopeful groaned in himself, saying, Oh, that I had kept on my way. Christian said, Who could have thought that this path should have led us out of the way? Hopeful said, I was afraid of it at the first, and therefore gave you that gentle caution. I would have spoken plainer, but that you were older than I. Christian said, Good brother, be not offended. I am sorry I have brought thee out of the way, and that I have put thee into such imminent danger. Pray, my brother, forgive me. I did not do it of an evil intent.
Hopeful said, Be comforted, my brother, for I forgive thee, and believe too that this shall be for our good. Christian said, I'm glad I have with me a merciful brother, but we must not stand thus. Let us try to go back again. Hopeful said, But good brother, let me go before. Christian said, No, if you please, let me go first, that if there be any danger, I may be first therein, because by my means we are both gone out of the way. No, said Hopeful, you shall not go first, for your mind being troubled may lead you out of the way again. Then, for their encouragement, they heard the voice of one saying, Set thine heart toward the highway, even the way which thou wentest, turn again. But by this time the waters were greatly risen, by reason of which the way of going back was very dangerous. Then I thought that it is easier going out of the way when we are in than going in when we are out. Yet they had ventured to go back, but it was so dark, and the flood was so high, that in their going back they had like to have been drowned 9 or 10 times. Neither could they, with all the skill they had, get again to the stile that night. Wherefore at last, lighting under a little shelter, they sat down there until the daybreak. But being weary, they fell asleep. Now there was, not far from the place where they lay, a castle called Doubting Castle, the owner whereof was Giant Despair. And it was in his grounds that they were now sleeping. Wherefore he, getting up in the morning early, and walking up and down in his fields, caught Christian and Hopeful asleep in his grounds. Then, with a grim and surly voice, he bid them awake, and asked them whence they were, and what they did in his grounds. They told him they were pilgrims, and that they had lost their way. Then said the giant, You have this night trespassed on me, by trampling in and lying on my grounds, and therefore you must go along with me. So they were forced to go, because he was stronger than they. They also had but little to say, for they knew themselves in a fault. The giant, therefore, drove them before him, and put them into his castle, into a very dark dungeon, nasty and stinking to the spirits of these 2 men. Here then they lay from Wednesday morning till Saturday night, without one bit of bread or drop of drink or light or any to ask how they did. They were, therefore, here in evil case, and were far from friends and acquaintance. Now in this place Christian had double sorrow, because it was through his unadvised counsel that they were brought into this distress. The pilgrims now, to gratify the flesh, will seek its ease, but oh, how they afresh do thereby plunge themselves new griefs into, who seek to please the flesh, themselves undo. Now Giant Despair had a wife, and her name was Diffidence. So when he was gone to bed, he told his wife what he had done, to wit, that he had taken a couple of prisoners and cast them into his dungeon for trespassing on his grounds. Then he also asked her what he had best to do further to them. So she asked him what they were, whence they came, and whither they were bound, and he told her. Then she counseled him that when he arose in the morning, he should beat them without any mercy. So when he arose, he getteth him a grievous crabtree cudgel, and goes down into the dungeon to them, and there first falls to rating of them as if they were dogs, although they never gave him a word of distaste. Then he falls upon them and beats them fearfully in such sort that they were not able to help themselves or to turn them upon the floor. This done, he withdraws and leaves them there to condole their misery and to mourn under their distress. So all that day they spent the time in nothing but sighs and bitter lamentations. The next night she, talking with her husband again about them further, and understanding that they were yet alive, did advise him to counsel them to make away themselves. So when morning was come, he goes to them in a surly manner as before, and perceiving them to be very sore with the stripes that he had given them the day before, he told them that since they were never like to come out of that place, Their only way would be forthwith to make an end of themselves, either with knife, halter, or poison. For why, said he, should you choose life, seeing it is attended with so much bitterness? But they desired him to let them go. With that he looked ugly upon them, and rushing to them had doubtless made an end of them himself, but that he fell into one of his fits. For he sometimes in sunshiny weather fell into fits, and lost for a time the use of his hand. Wherefore he withdrew, and left them as before to consider what to do. Then did the prisoners consult between themselves whether it was best to take his counsel or no. And thus they began to discourse. Brother, said Christian, what shall we do? The life that we now live is miserable. For my part, I know not whether it is best to live thus or to die out of hand. My soul chooseth strangling rather than life, and the grave is more easy for me than this dungeon. Shall we be ruled by the giant? Hopeful said, indeed, our present condition is dreadful, and death would be far more welcome to me than thus forever to abide. But yet let us consider, the Lord of the country to which we are going hath said, Thou shalt do no murder. No, not to another man's person. Much more then are we forbidden to take his counsel to kill ourselves. Besides, he that kills another can but commit murder upon his own body. But for one to kill himself is to kill body and soul at once. And moreover, my brother, thou talkest of ease in the grave, but hast thou forgotten the hell, whither for certain the murderers go? For no murderer hath eternal life. And let us consider again that all the law is not in the hand of giant despair. Others, so far as I can understand, have been taken by him as well as we, and yet have escaped out of his hand. Who knows? But the God that made the world may cause that giant despair may die, or that at some time or other he may forget to lock us in, or that he may in a short time have another of his fits before us and may lose the use of his limbs. And if ever that should come to pass again, for my part, I am resolved to pluck up the heart of a man and to try my utmost to get from under his hand. I was a fool that I didn't try to do it before. But however, my brother, let us be patient and endure a while. The time may come that may give us a happy release, but let us not be our own murderers. With these words, Hopeful at present did moderate the mind of his brother. So they continued together in the dark that day, in their sad and doleful condition. Well, towards evening, the giant goes down into the dungeon again to see if his prisoners had taken his counsel. But when he came there, he found them alive, and truly alive was all. For now, what for want of bread and water, and by reason of the wounds they received when he beat them, they could do little but breathe. But, I say, he found them alive. At which he fell into a grievous rage, and told them that seeing that they had disobeyed his counsel, it should be worse with them than if they had never been born. At this they trembled greatly, and I think that Christian fell into a swoon. But coming a little to himself again, they renewed their discourse about the giant's counsel, and whether they had best to take it or no. Now Christian again seemed to be for doing it, but Hopeful made his second reply as followeth. My brother, said he, remember thou not how valiant thou hast been heretofore? Apollyon could not crush thee, nor could all that thou didst hear or see or feel in the valley of the shadow of death. What hardship, terror, and amazement hast thou already gone through? And art thou now nothing but fear? Thou seest that I am in the dungeon with thee, a far weaker man by nature than thou art. Also this giant has wounded me as well as thee, and hath also cut off the bread and water from my mouth, and with thee I mourn without delight. But let us exercise a little more patience. Remember how thou playedst the man at Vanity Fair, and wast neither afraid of the chain, nor cage, nor yet of the bloody death. Wherefore let us, at least to avoid the shame that becomes not a Christian to be found in, bear up with patience as well as we can. Now, night being come again, and the giant and his wife being in bed, she asked him concerning the prisoners, and if they had taken his counsel. To which he replied, They are sturdy rogues. They choose rather to bear all hardship than to make away themselves. Then said she, Take them into the castle yard tomorrow, and show them the bones and the skulls of those that thou hast already dispatched, and make them believe, ere a week comes to an end, thou also wilt tear them in pieces, as thou hast done their fellows before them. So when the morning was come, the giant goes to them again, and takes them into the castle yard, and shows them as his wife had bidden him. These, said he, were pilgrims as you are once, and they trespassed in my grounds as you have done. And when I thought fit, I tore them in pieces, and so within 10 days I will do you. Go, get you down to your den again. And with that he beat them all the way thither. They lay therefore all day on Saturday in a lamentable case as before. Now when night was come, and when Mrs. Diffidence and her husband the giant were got to bed, they began to renew their discourse of their prisoners. And withal the old giant wondered that he could neither by his blows nor his counsel bring them to an end. And with that his wife replied, I fear, said she, that they live in hope that some will come to relieve them, or that they have picklocks about them, by the means of which they hope to escape. And sayest thou so, my dear? Said the giant. I will therefore search them in the morning. Well, on Saturday, about midnight, they began to pray, and continued in prayer till almost the break of day. Now a little before it was day, good Christian, as one half amazed, brake out in this passionate speech. What a fool, quoth he, am I, thus to lie in a stinking dungeon, when I may as well walk at liberty. I have a key in my bosom called promise, that will, I am persuaded, open any lock in Doubting Castle. Then said Hopeful, That is good news, good brother. Pluck it out of thy bosom, and try. Then Christian pulled it out of his bosom, and began to try at the dungeon door, whose bolt, as he turned the key, gave back, and the door flew open with ease, and Christian and Hopeful both came out. Then he went to the outward door that leads into the castle yard, and with his key opened that door also. After, he went to the iron gate, for that must be opened too. But that lock went damnable hard, yet the key did open it. Then they thrust open the gate to make their escape with speed. But that gate, as it opened, made such a creaking that it waked Giant Despair, who hastily rising to pursue his prisoners, felt his limbs to fail, for his fits took him again, so that he could by no means go after them. Then they went on, and came to the king's highway, and so were safe, because they were out of his jurisdiction. Now when they were over by the stile, they began to contrive with themselves what they should do at that stile to prevent those that should come after from falling into the hands of Giant Despair. So they consented to erect there a pillar, and to engrave upon the side thereof this sentence, Over this stile is the way to Doubting Castle, which is kept by Giant Despair, who despiseth the king of the celestial country, and seeks to destroy his holy pilgrims. Many, therefore, that followed after read what was written, and escaped the danger. This done, and they sang as follows. Out of the way we went, and then we found what 'tis to tread upon forbidden ground, and let them that come after have a care, lest heedlessness makes them as we to fare, lest they for trespassing his prisoners are, whose castle's Doubting, and whose name Despair. They went then till they came to the Delectable Mountains, which mountains belong to the Lord of that hill, of which we have spoken before. So they went up to the mountains, to behold the gardens and the orchards, the vineyards and fountains of water, where also they drank and washed themselves and did freely eat of the vineyards. Now there were on the tops of these mountains shepherds feeding their flocks, and they stood by the highway side. The pilgrims therefore went to them, and leaning upon their staves, as is common with weary pilgrims when they stand to talk with any by the way, they asked, Whose delectable mountains are these, and whose be the sheep that feed upon them? Mountains delectable they now ascend, where shepherds be which to them do commend, alluring things and things that cautious are, pilgrims are steady kept by faith and fear. Shepherds said, These mountains are Emmanuel's land, and they are within sight of his city. And the sheep also are his, and he laid his life down for them. Christian said, Is this the way to the celestial city? The shepherd said, You are just in your way. How far is it thither? Said Christian. Too far for any but those that shall get thither indeed, said shepherd. Is the way safe or dangerous? Said Christian. And shepherd said, Safe for those for whom it's to be safe, but the transgressors shall fall therein. Christian said, Is there in this place any relief for pilgrims that are weary and faint in the way? And the shepherd said, The Lord of these mountains hath given us a charge not to be forgetful to entertain strangers. Therefore the good of the place is before you. I think we'll stop there for tonight. I'm enjoying this. I hope that you are. I look forward to reading more with you next week. And pilgrims, Christians, carry on with your journey to the celestial city. Don't go to the right or to the left, but stay in the narrow way. God help us to do just that. See you soon, I hope.